and EPR. And this is exactly what I would like to present you today. I think we're all aware that plastic credits became really a hot topic over the last months and years, and has been raising a lot of attention. I think we all agree that it offers significant opportunities, especially for financing circular plastic systems, and that is what we want to discuss today. And at the same time, we see that uncoordinated and unregulated plastic credit schemes, of course, also bear risks. And this is especially what we wanted to look at with regard to incentives for waste prevention on the one hand, and the introduction of EPR systems, because that is, I think, also from a prevent point of view, those are crucial cornerstones for the sustainable use of plastics, for plastics in a circular economy. And against that background, we set up this small task force on plastic credits and EPR. And here also, again, thanks to Prevent for making that possible. Thanks also for those of you who participated in this discussion. I think that was a really interesting series of workshops based on the guiding questions. What are the crucial requirements ensuring that plastic credits don't undermine EPR and waste prevention? That was our guiding question here. The discussions have been summarized in a paper that we were happy to present also at the Circular Plastic Conference in Cologne with a lot of stakeholders. And I think that initiated some really interesting discussions. And based on that, I would like to present you some of the key outcomes as well as the follow-up steps that happened since then. So this is a short overview on what I would like to present. As mentioned, the risks and opportunities we discussed with regard to credits and EPR, as well as credits and waste prevention. Based on that, we draw some conclusions on key requirements that should be met by plastic credit schemes, identified some open questions, and then I'm happy to present you also some outcomes of first steps that we took since then, and to give you an outlook on what's planned in the coming weeks and months. Looking at plastic credits, that highlights the opportunities. Plastic credits can be used to increase collection and recycling of plastic waste, especially in countries without sufficient waste management infrastructures. Here in where I live in Germany, we have, I think, a quite well-established system, an EPR framework that works quite well. That is, of course, extremely expensive, and we need faster and better solutions for countries that currently suffer from plastic waste imports, that don't have the time to develop such infrastructure. And I think here is the opportunity for plastic credits. At the same time, we see, and I think that's what I also hear from the site visits, the really important socio-economic co-benefits, new jobs, stable incomes for waste workers. So it can be a very efficient approach because it focuses on the low-hanging fruits, on the plastic that can be easily collected and then recycled. At the same time, it offers also options for low-value plastic that are in the focus of our current pilot project that we will be happy to present a bit later. So against that background, for us, the question was, how can we develop plastic credit systems in order to achieve global relevance? I'll also talk a bit about the Global Plastics Treaty. What role could plastic credits play here, and what is needed for that? And I think what we also hear from a lot of industry stakeholders, what we need is a clear answer to a couple of risks and questions that are often raised. There is, of course, the risk of greenwashing linked to plastic credits, without with a lacking transparency, with lacking definitions, without a clear proof of positive impacts. Plastic credits can, of course, be misused, as any other circular business approach. So we have to find answers to that. I think closely linked to that, there's a need for a clear documentation that collected amounts of plastic waste are properly recycled and recovered. Now we know that some of the plastic credit schemes clearly focus just on collection. That's also fine, but then we have to show what happens to the collected waste afterwards. And it's also clear that we have to initiate discussions with companies as one of the key stakeholders. Plastic credits can offer to them a very short-term solution. They can always decide to pay for less in the following year or not pay at all. And I think this, the sustainability of the solutions that we set up, I think this is one of the key points. Facing these challenges, there are a lot of initiatives, platforms that try to set up minimum requirements that especially emphasize the additionality of these activities. And this is, of course, one of the most important points. And I think the value credit report was already mentioned. Other prevent activities also focus on that. I think this is crucially important, but in our work, we wanted to go a specific step further and also take into account EPR and waste prevention. And from my point of view, and that I'm happy to discuss, I think EPR should be the final target of everything we do to set up waste infrastructures. Extended producer responsibility, meaning that companies that put plastic products on the market actually take responsibility for the end of life costs related to the product they put on the market and the environmental impacts that are caused by them. I think in a functioning market, this should be the ideal solution. And of course, we're still quite far away from that. And against that background, we have to design plastic credits in a way that they avoid undermining future or already existing EPR systems. I think the EPR toolbox was already mentioned. I can only recommend you to have a look at it on the Prevent website. That is a really great collection of best practice examples for all the different aspects linked to EPR, especially focusing on how to implement it. That EPR is a good solution. I think we can all agree on that. The question is, how do we implement it? And I think here the toolbox is a really important step. And we were happy to present a specific case study, also covering the plastic credits here and the interlinkages to that. Looking at some of the key risks that we identified in this task force at the interface of plastic credits and EPR, we see that companies that put plastic credits on the market and that at the moment pay for plastic credits, that they could lobby because they're often more expensive than plastic credits. And they often include also a physical, very concrete obligation to collect and recycle waste. And I think here it's important that plastic credits are not used as an alibi for those companies for an EPR system. I think this is the first risk that we identified, where we currently try to understand how relevant is it. Do we have any proof for that really being a barrier? Second point, the issue of cherry picking. We know that also plastic credits have to pay wages. They have to make money. So there is a certain incentive to focus on those waste fraction and those plastic materials that are whereas the positive market value that can actually be sold to plastic waste traders. That can also lead to incentive to lower environmental standards, to lower labor standards, linked to ensuring safety and health standards. Now, all that can be caused and can be supported by plastic credit systems if we don't find ways to establish appropriate standards. So, especially in areas where we have different plastic credit systems, and looking just at India, there are a broad range of activities, organizations, institutions offering plastic credits. We have to find ways to avoid that they compete for paying clients, because if they have to do so, they often compete over the price. The cheapest plastic credit takes over the market, and that can easily mean lowering standards for workers, for safety regulations. That is the second risk that we see here. And then a final point on the challenges that we identified between plastic credits and EPR systems. If we have really successful plastic credit schemes in a region, in a country, there is, of course, a necessary discussion between the plastic credit scheme providers and local authorities or public authorities responsible for setting up EPR system. Because if the total amount of plastic waste that is actually available on the market that still has to be collected and then recycled is unclear, because so much of it could be already covered by plastic systems. Now the question is, how do we efficiently coordinate that? I think in the working group, we clearly discussed systems that we see are still in their infancy. The amounts that they actually collect are still limited, but this is a growing market. So I think looking at future challenges, this should be a point that we should take into account. Second point that we discussed, as mentioned, waste prevention. In Europe, we have the so-called Waste Framework Directive, clearly stating that there is a waste hierarchy, that waste should be prevented in the first place, and only if that's not possible, it should be reused, recycled, recovered, or disposed. And following that idea of a waste hierarchy, I think it's important to have in mind how can we design plastic credit systems that avoid to undermine incentives for waste avoidance for any stakeholder alongside the value chain. And I think this is an even more urgent issue, looking at the companies that at the moment pay for plastic credits. They have internal discussions about, and understandably about the question, if we already claim to be plastic free or plastic neutral, why is there a need to actually change our production patterns? Why do we have to change the design of our products? And we definitely should avoid a situation where plastic credits give an easy alibi to postpone the transformational change for plastic. The question is how can we use plastic in a sustainable way? This is important. This clearly has to deal with waste prevention, and the question is how do plastic credit systems fit into that? And in very concrete terms, and I'll come to that, who are we selling plastic credits to, and how can they use it in their communication? Here again, three risks. I think the first one I already mentioned. There is, of course, a risk that offsetting plastic pollution, like carbon pollution, by buying plastic credits, can normalize patterns of production as well as consumption that are unsustainable. If we look at the exploding amounts of unnecessary plastic packaging, question is, should we actually claim that as plastic neutral based on buying plastic credits? How do we enforce companies, obligate companies that want to buy plastic credits to actually prove the additionality of offsetting plastic emissions as a measure of a last resort after having done everything to avoid plastic waste wherever possible. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against plastic packaging that can help a lot to prevent food waste. But if you look at the current design of plastic packaging, you often see that they're unnecessary large, that they're double packing. So I think even the industry is aware that there's a lot to be done, that reuse could be an option for a lot of products. And plastic credits should never be an alibi to not work on these issues. Closely linked to that, plastic credits, also from an economic point of view, they're often seen as a simple way out by simply paying someone for a specific service, for providing a plastic credit. It is clear that preventing waste by changing the design of products, by changing distribution systems, especially when it comes to reuse, that takes time. That takes a lot of decision, that requires involving a lot of stakeholders. So it is an investment. What we see is that these investments are necessary for a circular economy, that in the long run they're optimal, also with regard to job creation, to economic considerations, as well as for from a social economic point of view. I think that is clear, and we shouldn't try to slow down that development. Plastic credits should not be an excuse not to work on these issues, because also from an economic point of view, waste prevention makes sense. Final point, especially linked to reuse. We see that especially single-use plastic packaging are one of the big concerns, that they are a key driver for the exploding plastic waste generation. As we already heard, this is a big issue also in India, but also here in Germany, the amount of plastic packaging waste per capita doubled over the last 20 years, and it's absolutely clear that this is not a sustainable solution for the future. So what we see is that we have to find ways to use also money generated by plastic credits to invest in long-term infrastructures that, for example, would allow reuse systems, but that also in the future ensure proper waste collection, high quality recycling of the waste materials. Now, all that requires investments into infrastructure, and plastic credits, as mentioned, they are often a short-term solution. So the question is, how do we link that to setting up the necessary infrastructures, and how can we include incentives to switch from single use to reuse? There are some really interesting solutions, but too often that's not the case. This maybe as a short overview on the potential risk that we identified in the working group. And of course, we didn't want to stop there. No, we wanted to look at possible solutions and especially requirements that we could set up for future plastic credit systems. And these are the 3 points that we discussed in the working group and also in the paper that I just showed you. Firstly, plastic credits should only be sold to organizations that can sufficiently prove that they explored all available options for waste prevention. This is, of course, a big task. How do we actually do that? How can a plastic credit provider monitor waste prevention activities of a companies that wants to buy their credits? I think there are some really interesting solutions and approaches to do that, but that should be one of the key requirements. Second point, plastic credit systems should commit to invest a transparent share of their incomes into longer lasting infrastructures. knowing that a lot of plastic credit systems are closely linked to clean up activities, this again is not a simple task. It will require really intense discussion. I think it would be great if the workshop today could maybe offer some ideas to that point. And finally, all investment and methodologies should be designed in a way that enable integration into EPR system. And what we want to achieve is that plastic credit could be a first step into the development of mandatory EPR systems in regions and in countries. Especially the interlinkage to EPR, we see that there are often potential conflicts when collections are not coordinated with public authorities. On the other hand, we see that there are really interesting synergies and that impulses could come from plastic credit activities to improve circularity, to initiate discussions on EPR, especially when it comes to setting up collection infrastructures, when it comes to monitoring of data. Often public authorities are not aware at all about the composition or the amounts of plastic waste. And here the plastic credit schemes, they can deliver really important and necessary input. And then we talk about setting up joint monitoring systems that requires a lot of trust, that requires a lot of trial and error pilot projects. And I think here also the prevent pilot activities are really exciting source of experiences that we want to share with stakeholders in local governments, but also on those working on plastic credit schemes. What we clearly see is that this interlinkage between EPR and plastic credits clearly depends on the current status of waste management systems and especially of EPR systems in specific regions. In countries where EPR is still not in place, where it's currently discussed, or even where even that didn't start yet, plastic credits can demonstrate governments that producers are willing to take over responsibilities. And here we see the specific strengths of plastic credits. In countries where EPR systems are currently being set up, plastic credits should contribute to the collection monitoring of data, as mentioned on maybe waste generation, shares of collected waste amounts, share of low value plastic, share of recycled plastic. And then we also discussed, is there a role for plastic credit systems in countries with already functioning EPR system? And I think here it will be necessary to really focus. There could be really interesting approaches focusing on plastic materials that are currently not recycled, for example, multi-layer. That could be interesting to include, for example, the informal sector that is often left out in EPR systems. That could also address ideas like the eco-modulation of EPR fees. So testing, how could a company that actually improves the recyclability of their product, how could they benefit from that by lower EPR fees? And I think this could be tested and developed, for example, by plastic credit schemes. We ended up with a couple of open questions. Should plastic credit schemes just focus on collection, or should they also include recycling? Should they focus on materials that are currently put on the market, or maybe specifically on historic waste that is now lying around and where no one wants to pay for it? And I think for me as an economist, one of the crucial questions, what kind of price level for plastic credit would ensure proper implementation of the waste hierarchy? How expensive should they be in order to not give any alibis for just putting more and more plastic waste or plastic products and then end up as plastic waste on the market? And I see here we see such a big spread looking at the price levels for plastic credits, here we need definitely more transparency. Based on that, based on the open questions, we try to formulate some next steps and guiding questions to dig a bit deeper and to make it a bit more concrete. Can plastic credits lead to waste prevention at all? And how do plastic credit systems and EPR systems coexist? And that, of course, could not be done in a workshop, but that required some empirical investigations. And so as a follow-up activity, we wanted to dig a bit deeper into specific plastic credit systems and find out more about what kind of plastic do they actually cover, what kind of activities, where is it collected, from which sources, what kind of information do they request from companies that they sell their plastic credits to, and how do they cooperate with public authorities. And we conducted over the last weeks a lot of interviews with plastic credit system providers and organizers, and really thanks a lot for everyone try to focus on activities in specific countries, for example Everwave and what they do in Cambodia, or Green Lifeline Generation and their activities in Sri Lanka. We looked at Nigeria, Indonesia. We actually see that plastic credits they became a global issue with systems operating all over the world. And what you also see is under the umbrella of plastic credits, we see a really rich diversity and complexity of what can be called a plastic credit. Now we see differentiations between credit types. Some of them focus on collection loan. Some of them actually include also prevention and avoidance. And looking at the different systems, we see that there are so great ideas now how to address these issues by, for example, providing different plastic credit types that are very transparently linked to just collection or even avoidance. Now we see that some of the plastic credit systems started to differentiate. Where has it been collected? Is it plastic waste from the shoreline, or is it ocean-bound plastic waste? To make also this very clear, and based on that also the price differences much more easily understandable for stakeholders looking at plastic credits. Now we've seen great examples of plastic credit schemes offering a registry of companies that actually buy the plastic credits, where stakeholders and NGOs can have a look at and also ask the companies, are you using it as the cheap way out, or are you actually focusing on waste prevention? We see some of the organizations that I showed you, they start to focus on in-country funding, asking local companies to invest in plastic credit things, and then to avoid the situation where a European company buys credits in one country to offset emissions and in a completely different area of the world. That's something that is hard to understand if you actually look at it. We see great examples for cooperation with public administrations, especially schools, to integrate the collection infrastructure also into household waste collection schemes in specific cities and regions. And we have, for example, also great really best practice examples that committed themselves to invest in long-term infrastructure, for example, a road infrastructure for the collection of plastic waste as a starting point. So what we see is, and I think this is also important, not only to understand the ecosystem of plastic credits, but also for the plastic credits companies themselves, successful systems manage to adopt to the very specific framework conditions. A plastic credit in one country has to be designed in a different way. And at the same time, of course, also for communication purposes, the question is, what is the core of a plastic credit? What are the standards that everyone would have to commit to? A short look into the future, and we will try to summarize all the findings from the interviews and the additional desktop research into one-pagers for showcasing what the systems do in specific countries. Now we want to highlight the benefits that we see, as well as the specific challenges. We want to explain the differences in scope and approaches, because I think this is the key questions that we here in Wuppertal and the Prevent get from a lot of external stakeholders. What kind of plastic credit should we buy, and which can we trust in, and why are they so different? And nevertheless, they all call it plastic credits. And then, with regard to that, we want to draw some conclusions on potential needs for standardization, for policy support, and of course, we would also like to integrate the outcomes of the environmental assessment that we're currently working on, and that we will present you a bit later in that workshop. Key point for me is the question, and this is my final slide, I promise, is how could we integrate systems like plastic credits into what the United Nations are currently developing as a global treaty on plastic waste? Is there a potential role for plastic credits in this framework? How can we benefit from the very positive experience, the best practice examples that we see? How could that be a part of that discussion? And I think this will be the key challenge in the coming year. The Prevent could be a channel, the working groups could be a channel, this workshop could provide input to that. Yeah, and the question is now, how do we organize that? How would we set up an efficient, a reliable and convincing platform? How can plastic credits contribute to solving the global plastic challenges that we have at the moment? With that, thank you very much. Really looking forward to comments and the rest of this workshop.
Okay, thank you so very much. I do understand we have a coffee break between me and you, but I would try to make a balance of just trying to, come up with some of the bullet points. We'll try to avoid some of the slides also. They are not now necessary, since we already have been discussing about these aspects. And it is important to carry forward the momentum when we have already talked about the credit mechanisms. So in this presentation, I would be talking about basically two elements, the governance and the plastic credit, but would like to take you through some of the slides which probably are avoidable, but still there are few reasons because of which I kept some of the snapshots. For example, this point number 2, if you have a look to this, you see, this was interesting that you see there are a number of studies who gives quite quantum of and various kinds of data. Some says 9 million, some say 3 million, all that. But keep that in mind. Yeah, there are a few things which are really very important to look into. Like 80% of the marine litter from one of the studies, it says that it's basically coming out of the 50 kilometers proximity of the coastal line. This is important, you see, because if we really look into the coastal areas, this gives an indication that how much can be done. Rest of it is coming from the riverine ecosystems, and that too, out of the riverine ecosystem, there are 10 only which are the major contributors, and out of 10, there are 2 which are in India. So these are a few of the things which really make it important to think about the plastic packaging. If you look at the CPCP's data, which I just tried to kept it, yeah, we are the 5th largest one who are into the production. When you talk about the plastic issue, this can be brought down, I think. Yeah, that makes more sense. And finally, if you just add on these flexible packaging and rigid packaging, it's almost like 60% of the plastic is going into the packaging. Now, this makes more sense that why we are talking about the credit mechanism, why we are talking about EPR, and why we are talking about what we are talking about in the since morning, and what we will try to discuss into it. Just one moment to make a mention of this specific thing. You see, the political will, as it was mentioned by our colleague also, is so very important. This is one of the picture from one of the Indo-German cabinet consultations. India and Germany have been working since pretty long. But why I've kept it in here is that, see, it was 2016 or 17 in one of the Indo-German Environmental Forum, which is also a platform between the 2 governments, joint working groups were being made. Then, and out of the 4 joint working groups, which are the technical working groups, one of them was on the waste and circular economy. And from there, this idea of working between the 2 governments initiated 2016-17 onwards to work on the marine litter, the plastic, and things around it, and all that. So I thought of making a mention of, because this is very important. I will just take a minute for telling you the particular project from where we do come in. I'm in here, my colleague Vivek is there, my another colleague Preeta is there. We are working in 3 states. And in a nutshell, if I say about this dynamic project, and I'm using the word dynamic, keeping quite a lot of things in mind, and it is dynamic. One, it is working on the demonstration of the techniques or the technologies. It is not about identifying, it is on implementing them on ground. What you see on the left side, one is we are working on the tracking, monitoring, reporting, that what are the mechanisms which we can try on. And we are already in a phase where we are very close to start such kind of things. Point number 2 is technological solutions to be implemented on ground. You talk about the capture mechanism, you talk about the tracking, or you talk about any other specific aspect of eco-design or of working with the brand owners to work on the design aspect. This brings me back to the point which I was discussing with Celine, was being mentioned by the other person. A lot is happening on the end of pipe of the particular plastic issue. N number of things. What about at the beginning of that pipe? Why can't we come across with some interventions on the design elements to avoid it and all such kind? This is also something we are trying to bring on ground. And finally, for which we are in here, the extended producer responsibility framework. We are working in 3 states for all these specific elements, working in a way that we are supporting the state governments also and the national government also. And in that particular thing, we are working very closely with the Ministry of Environment on the EPR, and I'll come on to that. So this is the NAMA facility project, because of which we are all in here. We already have mentioned about it. There are 5 objectives, and this particular project also talks about the technical interventions, and they are very closely working with the plastic waste processors to handhold them on technical aspects and also on bringing them onto the EPR framework, how to get engaged in all that. Due to the time limits, I'm not getting into the details, and coming back to the session, as I said, I'll be talking about the governance and the plastic credits. And to begin with, we have a lot of W with us. Y part is something we can keep apart. I'm sure you all will agree. We do have an understanding that why this is so very important, but who is going to do it, how we are going to do this credit mechanism, how we are ensuring that what is happening on ground with the recycler is being monitored by someone, how we are ensuring what he's doing here, as the gentleman have mentioned, is not being duplicated, how we are ensuring that 1 ton, if the credits are being generated, are somewhere being done on the ground level, where it is having, what if it happens. Quite a lot of these things will be there, and we'll just try to touch upon on them. But what is very important, one thing is for sure, that the overall EPR framework talks of strengthening the PWPs, the recycling capacity of the country, in such a fashion that you talk of reuse, you talk of reduce, you talk of recycle. That's the circular economy aspect which has been imbibed so very well in this particular EPR framework by the Government of India, Minister of Environment, after so much of consultation, and in a very less time, I must mention. And this is not me only who has been saying. We have heard quite a number of external experts also talking about this specific element, that the way India has gone, the speed and the dimensions and the diversity, this is something incredible with which this happened. So finally, when we will come to the end of my 7, 8, 12 slides, we would also agree to it that it's the circular economy driven mechanism which is coming into it. And there is absolute monitoring. We'll just touch upon that specific element also. And as I've said in the morning also, it is not overnight. There is an evolving process which happened in Europe also, elsewhere also for EPR. Same is happening in India also. Okay, this is not working this way. Yeah. So these are the categories. I don't need to get into the details of it when we talk about the plastic packaging in India. Category 1, category 2, category 3. One is basically about the rigid plastics. The 2 is basically about the flexible one. And the third is the multi-layer packaging. And the fourth one, which has been recently introduced, is about the compostable plastics which have been initiated. Earlier, there were 3 categories. Now there are 4. As I said, it's an evolutionary process. There are quite a lot of other things which will also come in. How does all this work? Let's get into it slowly. And I will just, in the next 10 minutes, not more than that, I will try. If it depends on the interaction, we'll take you to this specific journey, how these things are working. We have on the source, it comes to the PBOs, we sell it in the markets, we use it, and then afterwards, if it is not going for the end of the disposal, there is the circularity which is being tried into the EPR on the reuse for the category 1, rigid plastic. 2024-25 onwards, this is going to come, and we will see into the targets also. So there is an absolute circularity when we talk about category 1. If we talk about the recycled content for category 1, 2, and 3, which is the rigid one, the flexible one, and MLP, you again see that there is a recycled content which will come from 2025 onwards, which they will have to take from the market, bring it back to the PBOs, and there is a particular mechanism which has been already set up, to which we will work hand in hand. For the recycle part, the discussion already have been there for all the 3 categories. This is going to work out, even for the 4th one, the compostable one. So I'll not dig into it, but just to touch upon the targets, you see, of these, it is 2025 onwards that the reuse of the rigid packaging, brand owners will do that. When you talk about the recycled contents, 2025 onwards, it will happen. And fulfillment of the EPR obligations to recycling again is going to happen after 2024. But that doesn't mean that the brand owners cannot start today. I have some examples which probably, if the time permits, I will give you. And there are people who are working already, and we are working with them. And that's what I see as this alliance platform to take things on the technical implementation, as NAMA project is doing, as we are doing, to take on to the next one. Let's have a look to this little heavy slide, which will talk about the credit governance in the EPR framework. I kept 3 specific dimensions here. One is the arrow, which is the last one, how the plastic flows. We'll not get into it to a great extent. Then what are the regulations and the flows which are in? And then the third one, the most important one, that what is the financial flows, the credit mechanism and all that which has been working across. So I'll not get into this. We know this. We have the brand owners, producers, importers. There is already a system with which it go to the recyclers or to the use cycle or processing or to the landfill, or there are informal collectors, or finally, eventually it goes to the junk shops and to the waste aggregators. This is a dimension which is known to all of us. But then it comes now to the plastic waste processor, recyclers, or end of life manager, what we try to say in that fashion. And this is how the overall, the plastic flow looks in the Indian market. Now, if I just add on to the prospect of the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Central Pollution Control Board, the government side into it, what are the takes, ins and outs? So the PBOs have to register. First thing, they have to do the annual reporting. There are timelines for that. Let's not get into the details. And they have to do a mention of the particular amount of the plastic into the market POM, and finally they'll have to do the obligations for that specific things. In return, there would be, and there are recycling targets, there are reuse targets, there are recycled content targets which they have to, fulfill, and there is this compliance mechanism which they do have to. If they don't do, they'll have to go through the deregistration, which means they'll not be able to operate in the country. And this is the teeth, this is the hook, which is bringing them together to go for this specific kind of an element. Let's have a look to the other aspect with the PWPs. Again, they have to register, they have to do the reporting, and all this is being done on the Central Pollution Control Board's portal, which is live, and most of us know about this also. There would be the request generated for the credit issuance. Once I am registered there, doesn't mean that I can issue the credits. It will go there. There would be some sort of investigations, site visits, and all that. Then you would be allowed to. So this is what is happening on this side of the chain. In return, there would be inspections done by the government to these plastic waste processor sites. Then they would be able to issue the credits, and there would be the monitoring operations and all that, which was the discussion point just a while ago, that how we ensure that 1 ton which is being certified as the plastic credit is actually be somewhere happening or not. Now, where does this finance flows in? Once the PWP is the one who is going to generate the plastic credits, it would be the PBOs who will take it, and in return, this is the payment mechanism with which they are going to work out. So in a nutshell, this is the flow which is going to happen. But if this not happens, then what happens is there is a provision of environmental compensation. We call it EC, which has been kept another tooth. Why so? Because if, for example, one of the brand owner is not able to do it on a particular duration or particular year, he could not do the reportings and all that. So the provision has been kept. There is a high amount which they will have to give as an environmental compensation. And the amount as of now, what I know, and the discussion is somewhere in the range of 20 to 25% of the market value of the plastic. So it is pretty much of an amount which they will have to pay. But you see, as I said, and I will keep on saying it, it is an evolving process. The government has come across with the provision that, okay, if I, as a brand owner, could not do it on the year 1, I will have a penalty which would be somewhere 5 rupees a kg, 5,000 a ton. If I could not do it again on the second year, it would be 10. And if I cannot do it for the third year, it would be then 20. The amount also which would be kept in the environmental compensation would not be used. There is a committee which will work on the various aspects which are required for the country, and they will take care of it. So the provision also says that if there is an organization brand owner who is not able to do this in the year 1, so but they do it in the second year or in the third year, there is a particular amount which will flow back to them also. So absolute transparency is something which the government is trying hard to bring in. We go further onto it. If you talk about, as we said, that it is RRR on which this EPR absolutely is working. Now, with this kind of a mechanism coming in, there would be a use of the recycled content 2024-25 onwards, which will come to the brand owners. When we talk about the reuse of the packaging plastic on this corner, there would be the reuse which the brand owners are going to do, and I will catch on that specific category also where this is going to happen. And in other terms, if you talk about the financials are also going to work, and they should work in such a way, and we are assuming it will work in such a way that these plastic waste recyclers, they should also give some certain amount to the people from where the material is coming in. The 2 arrows which you now say informal collectors, or it can be the recyclers, or it can be someone else to whom they are the one who are bringing the material to them. So this is also the overall intention of the finance mechanisms, that ultimately with the credit between the PBOs and the PWPs, the benefit should also flow down to those people who are really the pickers from our home, who are really the ones who are working in very harsh conditions to bring that plastic to the particular place where it should lie on. So that's how this overall finance mechanism, the credit mechanism, the plastic mechanism is flowing when we talk about these specific dimensions. I just wanted to portray this specific thing because this is important. That will set the stage for my next 4, 5, 7 slides. Needless to go into it, we have the registration portal and it is working well. I will also give you the picture of that. What is the status as of now? But if you talk about the EPR plastic credit, decoding it, the most important aspect is to that we need to understand who is generating it and who is buying it, what are and how are they obliged, what are the mechanisms which have been put, and I just try to touch upon few of those specific aspects just now. And as I've mentioned, there are 4 types of the credit systems. It would be interesting to just keep it here that the plastic waste processors, the recyclers can take care of the recycling and the end of life kind of disposal mechanisms, whatsoever they come across with. And the PBOs are going to do the reuse and the use of the recycled content. The PWP cannot do the use of the recycled content. It's pretty obvious. So this dimension is also pretty important. How it is going to work? Let's have a look to it. There is this particular formula. I'm sure everyone would have gone through it, A plus B minus C. So how the targets of the plastic credits with the PBOs in the market is going to work as per the market calculations. Let's assume that, let's take the producer, for example. If I'm a producer, the packaging material which I'm selling in the market is A, let's say 100 tons. The waste a little bit, 110, let's say 110, and I'm doing it to give it to the brand owners. Why will I keep it with me? And finally, if it happens, let's say I minus the amount which I had given to the brand owners, it would be what? 100 if I assume A, 10 if I assume 110, and if I have given 105 tons to the brand owner, my liability would be only 5 tons. That's how the overall mechanism has been set up. In this overall EPR framework. Same is going to be with the importers. But when it comes to the brand owners, because ultimately they are giving it to the brand owners, there is a slight difference. And the difference would be that whatever comes to the brand owner in terms of, the packaging material, which we keep as X quantum, let's say 100 tons, plus whatever we, while making the product for which we are doing the packaging to put it into the market, there would be some rejects or whatsoever. This would be the pre-consumer plastic waste, let's say 10 tons. So 110 PBOs are going to be responsible for this overall 100 ton. They have to take care of this specific thing. So that's how this overall market is done. The only one point I would just mention and go forward is, in case of the brand owners, as I've said in earlier, the reuse part that you, for example, a Saffola can you give into the market, which is 4.9 kgs above weight. These rigid category 1 is something which would be done by the brand owners. And when you talk about the brand owners, this much of credit which is going to happen after 2025 is going to get minus from their overall obligations. So this is how the mechanism has been set up. Let's just very shortly have a look. I wanted to get into the detail, but these targets are known to everyone. In all the 4 targets, so to say, for the PBOs and for the brand owners, if you see category 1, I don't know if it is working or not. That's why I'm just trying to. Anyway, you see on the top that recycling, have a look to the targets. They are pretty on a higher side. You see 50, 60, 70, 80 onwards for the recycling. You talk about the recycled plastic content from 2024 onwards for the category 1. Similarly for category 2 and 3. For 3, it is very less because multi-layer plastic obviously is something which we are also struggling, and the globe is also struggling with how to come across. There are multi-layer plastics where there are 3 layers, and we've heard 4, 8, 10, and 17 layers. There are recyclers who are dealing in India with the 17 layers and such kind of. So it is going to be very difficult when we talk about. That's why I think the government have decided to put them on a little lower side. When you talk about the brand owners, as I've said, packaging less than 4.9 kgs or liter, as I've talked about the rigid container. Let's say if I'm taking a vegetable oil from market, and if this rigid container is, let's say 5 kgs, 4.9, there would have been reason 5 kgs above. So no, the first one is the less than 5 kgs. Sorry, you see the targets are little on the lower side, 10, 15, 20, 25. But for the containers or for the rigid reuse, which are 4.9 kgs above, you see how higher the targets are being kept. So what I'm trying to simply say as a summarize it, the recycling targets are almost the same when we talk about, but we talk about the recycled content, they are higher for the rigid, but very low for the category 3. And if you talk about the reuse element only on two subcategories, which I've talked about, category 1, rigid plastic, there is quite a lot of emphasis by the government that this is something which should really happen very well. And that is why for less than 4.9 and for greater than 4.9, the targets are pretty higher. One point is that they are going to be a situation for the PBOs wherein they'll have to really rely on all the specific targets. They'll have to comply with them. And that's why, as of now, what they're trying to go into the market, various different kind of dimensions and mechanism on which they are working for the reuse, for the reduce, for the design, for the eco design, or several other kind of aspects. This is something which is going to be the reason that these 2024 onwards, the targets are very stringent. If I just talk about very shortly about what is considered in the plastic waste processors for the plastic credits, or what is the eligibility, there are two specific categories on which this is happening. One is the recycling and one is the end of life. These are various different kind of categories. You see, category, there are 11 altogether, but if you talk about the recycling of category 1, what can be done? They can do pallets or the chips. If you talk about the recycling of the category 2, it's again the same thing, but for category 3, it can be the fibers also. So similarly, for end of pipe also, end of life also, they can do the co-processing in the cement plants, because there are these two things only with the PW can do: recycling and disposal. Similarly, for the steel plants, for the waste to energy plants and the waste to oil, and in oil also there are various dimensions. So let's not get into those things. But this intention is to make a mention of that how diverse they have gone into deciding about the overall credit mechanism and overall framework which has been designed. So plastic credit certificates, if I just take a minute on that specific thing, how the robustness has been brought in. Once the plastic waste processor have the physical verification by the particular state body, the government body, then only he would be able to, generate the EPR certificates, the plastic certificates, and then these certificates can be issued by the recyclers or the ULBs to the PPOs. But you see the 7 elements which they have to take care of. That shows that the overall mechanism has been kept so transparent and robust that probably the attempt is that the kind of talks we were into, the paper tradings and all such kind of things are being avoided. But yeah, there are still challenges with which the government is trying to work out. And as I said, evolving process, they will also come across with some sort of solution in that element also. Probably one of my last slides, that if we just very shortly talk about that, we said that who and how this is going to happen. But if we just have a look on the trading of the EPR certificate and surplus credit, for example, I was talking in the morning that why to wait till 224 if I'm an organization who have to take that target, then why can't I start working from now today onwards? For example, we have a cement company with whom we are working in our project. They put upon, I think, 32,000 tons of the plastic bag in which they put their cement and throw it in the market. And there are 7 or 8 different categories of these particular. We have been working with them and they are convinced to it that the only element which they can do is that if they can somehow use some technical interventions on ground to de-ink that specific plastic, pouch, then it would be absolutely monomaterial. It would be very easy for the recycled content, and they can start this particular work now. And when the time would be there, they can claim those specific credits also. There are such kind of provisions also. Let's assume that we have the recycler. He is capable of dealing into the recycle certificate for end of life certificate, and we have 1 people. For example, I have the certificate and I give it to the recycler certificate to 1 specific PBO. in a recycle category, and this recycled surplus, if you talk about, can go to another PIBO also. For example, this is Lalit, and for example, that PIBO is Vivek, my colleague, and if Vivek somehow could not manage to get onto the targets, he can rely on these recycled surplus from Lalit also. That's kind of a transfer mechanism also is being provided, which ensures that there are other kind of options. It will encourage the brand owners to come forward to even work if their credit targets and other EPR targets are being managed. But there are some specifications which have been kept. I would just shortly touch on that. If you talk of the end of life disposal certificate from A PIBO to B PIBO, he can only do it on the end of life disposal shortfall. But if you talk about the recycled surplus, it can go into the recycler shortfall and end of life also. And if you talk about the reuse surplus, and that's why the reuse surplus or the reuse credits are going to be the most important one, you can transfer them in all the three categories to the second one. So that's how such kind of dimensions have been kept. These are some of, I think it's a month ago. What I'm trying to showcase is that, you see, when you talk about the brand owners, you see how many takers are there. The upper side is all about takers. But when you talk about the plastic waste processor registers till date, I'm not talking about till date. The difference is really huge. It is 3 to 4 times. That's why it is very important that we do have this PWP registered. And mind you, and underline, it is not the scenario that the recyclers are not there. When you talk about the overall recycling capacity of India, the situation is something different. We are talking about the formal players. And that's why the informal to get formalized. And that's where the Ministry and Central Pollution Control Board are trying really hard to work in a fashion that, okay, they try to convince them that they also go for the registration, and the registrations are there. This is very important to understand. What if in the market, we don't, let's say, if in Kerala, if I'm just assuming in Kerala, if there is X amount of the, demand for the credits, but we don't have people in there as the plastic waste processors, you can imagine about that kind of a scenario, what will happen. That's why there is a lot of effort which has been given for this specific thing. This is a capture from the website. You see on the specific PWP, you can have a look. In Delhi, there are registrations, and then you can further go down that who are the players who are in and around that specific geographical locations, and still they are working on further improving such kind of interventions and all that. So finally, yeah, there are some barriers, and they are pretty obvious. The registration is the first one on which everyone is struggling, convincing the PBOs and the PWPs to come and register. Hey, please come on. Our NAMA project is working with 2 or 3 in Varanasi and several others. They are also trying hard to bring the recycler, because there are a number of things I should not get into. What if my data goes to the government, and if they try to, put pressure on us, close-ups and all that? There are various dimensions on which these people are not really very much convinced and all to come forward for. A very important one is the channelization. The stakeholders integration is so very important, and that's why the inclusion of the channelized plastic waste to the formal sector is very important if you talk about this overall EPR and if you talk about this credit mechanism to work. There are a variable, quality of plastics as a particular reason that affects the selection of the right technology. We can talk about this specific thing. You see, if I am a recycler who have somehow brought an extruder machine from Germany, think about the efficiency of that. It would be producing almost, like, say, 95 to 98%, and only 2 to 3% of waste. Very good, wonderful. But if I just I'm a recycler who took the machinery, extruder machinery from a fabricator local, where the efficiency is only 30% or 40%, who is going to, and I am able to generate 1,000 tons of certificates because of, on the basis of the input material which I have taken, who is going to do this kind of balancing on the technology? So a lot of interventions are required on the technology also. Very recently, this has come up. I've talked in the morning, these for the single-use plastic, because of the ban, the alternative mechanism which have come up paper, you talk about biodegradables. They are talking that whatever granules you were using in your extruders for the processing of plastic, you use the same machinery and use our granules, which are now corn based. I mean, okay, it may work, but I'm sure there are going to be some particular basic common sense things which probably will not allow them to do so. As of now, the experiments are on, they are doing it. But there are quite a number of technological interventions, particularly for the plastic waste processors, on which a lot is yet to happen. Uh, they operate at 400 degrees in the extruder machine. There are dioxins and all that, obviously. There are rejects. Do they have the do they have the incinerator also, or some sort of a mechanism which is taking care of the fumes which is coming out of it? No. So there are some loopholes into it. You talk about those people who are making the transparent granule. Let's not talk about the black granule people, the transparent granule. The PWPs who are making or are into the field of making transparent granule, this overall process is very, very water intensive. N number of cycles goes on for their washing purposes and all that. Then again washing, then again washing. Because even a single different color, if comes in the overall manufacturing, the transparency will go and he will not get the rate which he is desiring. Think about the n number of cycles through which he has to wash that particular plastic. Are we catering the microplastic aspect there? Because he's simply throwing it into the system which is there in the industry wheresoever they are. Are we talking about the what kind of water mechanisms you should have? Are we talking about that if you have a PWP, ultimately you can put a pressing machine with which you can put your ultimate water out before it, quite a lot of content of the plastic which is there would be there into the pressing one. So there are quite a number of interventions which are to be required to be done on the plastic waste processes and all that. And towards last lack of finance, this is something which has to really work up. Yeah, there are mechanisms which are to be kept on. And if I just finally touch upon implementation bottlenecks, yeah, competition from the international plastic credit is going to play its own role, but we will see how things will mature into the market. So I would not touch upon to these elements of what are the mandatory, voluntary, and obligatory for all the targets because of time constraint. I have tried to touch upon on these specific elements to some extent, but looking at the coffee, what was more important was that we, in the flow of the discussion we had since morning, we talk about that how the credit mechanism, the Indian credit mechanism is going to work and what are the frameworks and all that. So if I come back to this specific slide that why, how, who, where, I think there would be a little bit of clarity. And on particularly on these specific elements that the overall recyclers are the one who are the main heroes. It is the 3R principle on which we are working on recycling also, reduce also, and recycle content also. The overall EPR drives in that fashion and takes forward the circular economy into it. That's why I said that it has been very well written. Absolute monitoring, we have tried to touch upon that specific element. And as I said, it is an evolving process. Finally, it is not enough. There are other aspects also on which quite a lot of work has to be done. And that's what I was talking with the Alliance that we will discuss that how can we work on, for example, if you talk about the design aspects, how can we work on the reduction, elimination of the plastics, alternatives. There is a new terminology which I have very recently come across with, and I'm happy to make a mention of it once again. And this happened after the UNIA 2022, the umbrella agreement, which quite a number of players this year have agreed that by 2024, we will have a framework on which we will abide. Germany also, after that, have come across with 5-pointer program. And in that 5-pointer program, the first point talks about avoiding the avoidable plastic. We, in the morning also have sought in the Alliance, we are also talking about that. The plastic pact from CII, they are also having 4 categories out of which one of them is. So there is a lot which has to be done on the other different dimensions also. That was my last take on it, that okay, what is there available as a mechanism is one thing, credit is one thing. What are the loopholes with the whatever, PBOs or PWPs, what are the loopholes in the finance mechanisms are all other different things. But when we are talking about so much on the end of plastic problem, there has to be quite a lot which is to be initiated, particularly in the country like India as of now, on the initial stage, which is the design stage, which is the source, to avoid it and to do quite a lot into it. With these words, I would thank you all for being very good audience. And look forward if there are few specific questions, or I don't know how this is planned. Yeah. Can I go back?
Yes.